Dahlia, thank you so much for waiting patiently in the wings. So Dahlia does the conveyancing, so she's a property solicitor. Dahlia, would you like to sort of explain, introduce yourself and explain what you do?
Okay, so my name's Dalia, and I work in conveyancing, so lit lawyer. So we deal with everything to do with buying or selling a house. But for this instance and for this video, we're just going to focus on the buying aspect for first-time buyers. So technically, when you made an offer, you've got your mortgage offer in principle, and you've put in an offer, it's been accepted. This is where I will step in to basically handle the conveyancing transaction from start to finish. So the first thing for me, for a first-time buyer, is that we would need to do the AML, which is the anti-money laundering. So passport, ID, and those process for onboarding for me takes some time. So I would always advise the moment you know you've seen a property and you're about to make an offer or you're in negotiations, this is the point where you instruct me, because it can take sometimes weeks. And then if your offer's in place, chances are memorandum of sale will come straight to me, and then I've got to wait for you to do all the IDs and stuff. So start right at the sort of beginning, so you know it. I'm putting in an offer, I'm going to instruct my conveyancer and get all the groundwork done. So that would be the first most important part for me. Secondly, source of funds. So source of funds, I mean, I'll have first time buyers and they'll be like, oh, well, I've done this with my mortgage broker. Oh, I've done this with the agent. But you've got to do it again with me, because we're all individual entities. And I still need to know and do my checks to make sure that you are compliant, you can afford, and you have the deposit. Because worst case scenario, I wouldn't want to get to exchange and you don't have the deposit. So in that sense, you may be repeating yourself or in that regards, but it's important because this is what we need. So AML, anti-money laundering, source of funds. So once I know all of that's in place,
Sorry,
then we
Dahlia, just to
start.
step back a little bit.
Yes,
When
go
you
on.
say instruct, what do you mean by instruct? And can you also
Yeah.
mention the payment on account element? Because I know a
Yeah.
lot of first-time buyers can be shocked by that.
Yeah. Okay. So once you've done that, and then I send you my quote, and then you're happy to instruct me to act as your conveyancer, then we'll do the onboarding. So that's you
Do they have to
uploading.
send the instruction by, sorry to cut you off, by
Yeah.
email, in writing, or can they
Oh
verbally
yes,
say they
yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
instruct you? How
So
does that work?
if they want to instruct me, generally if they've got my number, I would first things first, I'll always ask them a bit about the property, how much, and all that information, and then I'll send them out a quote. If they're happy with my quote, they can either email me, preferably by email, I'm happy for you, and then that's where I would start opening my file. So when I open my file now, it consists of all the onboarding. And then one of the parts of the onboarding is my terms and conditions. So that's where they digitally sign. They're happy with the terms and conditions and happy to proceed. So once all of the onboarding has been done and they make that on account payment, because a lot of people are shocked with the on account payment, but generally speaking, with purchases as opposed to sales, you have upfront costs. And one of the biggest upfront costs that you have to sort of be aware of is your searches.
Mhm.
And generally, we have to, in
And what kind of
technicality,
searches? What is a search?
yeah. So in technicality, we have normally 4 searches we have to do. Local authority, which tells you about the local area. So you
Okay.
don't want to buy a property and then you find out next year or the year after there's plans to build a highway literally next door, because it has happened. So these searches are to preempt. Then we do drainage search, and that's things that we discover about the property around the drains, the pipes, boundaries. Again, these searches are important because, for instance, you may buy a property that has a conservatory built on it. Now, if the seller didn't get the necessary planning permissions, he may have built over a drain, and then that causes more problems. So all of these things, all of these searches are there to help you to make that conscious decision as to whether you want to buy the property. Now, in my line
Sorry,
of
what are the
work,
other, you said 4 searches. What are the
well, core
others?
search. So we got environmental search. So
Okay.
environmental searches, they're just things about the environment,
Hmm.
turbulence, wind, just general environmental things that will
Yeah,
just come up.
environmental
And the last
search.
one again is planning. But the most important two, I would say, out of the 4 is the local authority and the drainage search. But they all form as a package.
And when does
However,
the title deed come in? You know, your check to check that the person selling
yeah,
actually owns it. When does that?
okay.
Because I was a
So
bit
that,
shocked by a story from a client trying to buy a property off someone who was selling and didn't even own it.
oh wow, yeah, that um welding conveyancing, always, you always have something or another. But generally, I'll rewind. So once the buyer puts in their offer,
Yes.
and then I will get a memorandum of sale from Trisha or another agent.
Uh-huh.
And then I will contact the seller, and then it's at that point they will send me their draft contracts. So the draft contracts will consist of a draft contract, which I
Hmm.
will look through and approve, the title documents and plans, and anything else associated with that. And it could be a range of things, because I always say no conveyancing transaction is the same. So you may have, it could be a probate sale, so then I may need to have probate documents. It could be a sale in repossession, so it's different documents in that
Each
regards.
time. Yeah.
So yeah, so each draft contract pack will consist mainly of the title, which will reflect if the person who's claiming to sell it owns it, and the plan of the property, which shows the boundary, which is very important. And that, from that plan, that's what I would use to make the searches. Okay.
Okay. No, that's
So,
great. Thank you.
and then once, after I've done that, so there is a process of, once the searches come in, I'll be perusing the title at the same time, and I'll be raising inquiries. So generally, most clients, they'll be like, oh, when are we going to go into exchange? When we're ready to exchange, as they've instructed me, they're talking about exchange. And I
Can
have
you
to tell
explain
them,
what exchange is?
I'm going to explain,
Oh,
definitely.
okay. Sorry.
I have to tell them we're not ready to exchange. So exchange is basically where you exchange contracts. So you're exchanging contracts, but it's at that point you're bound. So for me, once you've exchanged, there's no pulling out. And if you do pull out, you will lose your deposit. So I always say to
Yeah,
my,
so they have to give you the deposit at exchange.
before exchange, yes, they'll
So
give
at
me the,
what point do they have to give you the deposit?
so at the point of once we've done the searches and I've raised inquiries, and once I'm satisfied that everything is good to go, then I would say, okay, we're ready to exchange, or we're getting to ready to exchange. So generally, what will happen is I will raise inquiries, and the seller solicitors will reply to them. And if they're satisfactory, then I will begin
Just
to
to
report.
clarify, inquiries
Yeah.
are just questions that you have about the documents and the information you've received. That's all they
Everything
are.
that
They're
we,
just
that's all
questions.
they are. They're just questions and answers.
Hmm.
But like, one thing I always say to my clients is, the onus is never on you to, when you're buying, the onus is always on you for selling. So technically, meaning, if I don't do my job correctly, you won't have a problem to buy the property, but you will have a problem when you come to sell the property.
Hmm.
So that point, as much as everybody's like rushing, you may be getting pressures from the upper
You have to
chain,
do your
everybody
due
wants to come,
diligence.
I have to do my due diligence, because I'm working for the betterment of you, because it is an investment. And you don't
Absolutely.
want to be stuck with an
And we're talking
investment
about
that you
hundreds
later
of
on,
thousands of pounds.
you cannot shift, you
Mm.
know. So I may end up doing four searches, but from that 4 searches, it's revealed maybe something that I may need to do further searches. So the 4 main searches: local authority, drainage, planning, and enviro. But if, for instance, there's something that was flagged up on the local authority or the enviro search, that the property is in a subsidence, or in an area where there's a lot of coal mining, then I may have to do a coal mining search. I may have to do other searches. So it is quite costly even before we get to the point of exchange, because you've got all of these searches. And sometimes first-time buyers, they don't always understand why we have to do this search. Why
Is it taken so
but
long? Yeah.
why is it taking so long? That is the most common question that that's always been asked. Why does it take so long? Generally, a conveyancing transaction on a clear title, meaning there's no
Issues, yeah.
restriction, no issues on the title, can take 10 weeks.
Okay.
That's 8 to 10 weeks, straightforward. And that is cash buyer. So when you factor in lenders, when you factor in a chain, it takes longer because
Can you
you've got
explain
more.
what a chain is, Dahlia?
Okay, yeah, sure. Sorry. A chain is all right. So you've got first-time buyer. So first-time buyer, there's nobody below them. Okay. They're selling. And if they're buying a property and the person who's buying a property is not also buying a property, then that's the short chain. Okay. So say, for instance, they're buying a new build from a developer. So there's nobody below them, there's nobody above them. That's the chain. It's
Yes.
sweet and simple. However, if they're buying a property that the person is selling, but that person is also buying, and the person they're buying from is also buying, then the chain can just go on and on. So the person at the top of the chain may be sitting around waiting. They're putting pressure on the poor person at the bottom, because they just want, well, we're ready. But that's how the factoring goes. So if there is a big chain, you're always going to get pressure from the top. And I always say to my clients, don't worry about it. They have to wait. The only time we have to panic if somebody is at the top of the train, if their mortgage offer is going to expire, and then that's another kettle of fish. But generally speaking, if the chain is not too long, then you can just sort of process and everything can just sort of,
And it's interesting you say, I mean, mortgage offers normally last 6 months anyway, so they have got a bit of time. So thanks for that, Dahlia. That was really informative. So we've gone to exchange now. You've already got the deposit. The contracts have been exchanged. What happens next?
So before we get to exchange, I always advise, and I'm just going to touch on what Tricia said. I always advise my clients, before we exchange, go back and check the property. It's a must. So once they've come back, everything's fine. They've checked the property. I've got their deposit. We exchange. So once we exchange, then before we get to exchange, we'll negotiate dates. So we'll have a completion day. Normally, it's a 2-week. Sometimes it could be less. Sometimes it could be longer. It just all depends on all parties. But once we've completed, once we've exchanged, and say we exchange and we're going to complete on the 10th, then I will then request from the lenders the certificate of title. So that's a drawdown of funds and then they will do all their other necessities in terms of removals. Once we complete, then that's it. They own the house, they can collect the keys. But there's still other works to do, because once we've completed, then I've got the work to register the title into the client's names. And
so that's on land registry to say that they own it.
That's on land registry. Normally it used to take 6 weeks, but because land registry are working at a backlog, at the moment they can be taking anything to 6 months to basically register the property to the client's name.
And it's important to stay on top of that, isn't it? I mean, I know personally, when they go to remortgage, if it never got registered and you're on like a 2-year fixed, if it's taken like months and months and months and it hasn't been registered, then you're in a bit of an issue. I mean, what can first-time buyers do to sort of smooth